The sound of tropical waves should have been soothing, but all I could hear was the cruel laughter echoing from the resort's beachfront restaurant where my husband's family sat without me, again. What they didn't know was that every grain of sand they walked on, every luxury they enjoyed, every sunset they watched from those premium cabanas belonged to me. My name was on the deed, my signature on every major decision, my inheritance funding their perfect vacation. They thought I was just Ryan's quiet little wife who worked some boring office job. They had no idea they were about to discover that the woman they'd been treating like an outsider for the past 3 days actually owned the entire resort they were bragging about affording. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Emma, and I've always been the type of person who prefers to blend into the background rather than demand attention. It's not that I lack confidence, but I've learned that sometimes the most powerful people are the ones nobody sees coming. At 28, I work as what I tell people is a travel coordinator, which isn't technically a lie. I do coordinate travel, just not in the way most people imagine. What I don't usually mention is that I coordinate luxury travel experiences across a chain of high-end resorts that I inherited from my grandmother 3 years ago. My husband Ryan knows I work in hospitality, but he's never been particularly interested in the details of my job. He's a marketing director at a mid-sized firm, the kind of guy who likes to talk about quarterly projections and client acquisitions at dinner parties. His family has always seen me as somewhat beneath their social circle, despite the fact that we live comfortably, and I've never once asked Ryan for financial support. They view me as the quiet girl who somehow managed to snag their golden boy, though I've never understood what makes Ryan so golden in their eyes. The vacation to Sunset Bay Resort in Costa Rica had been planned for months. Ryan's family does an annual trip together, and this year, his mother Margaret had insisted on somewhere tropical and luxurious. She'd spent weeks researching resorts, comparing amenities and reading reviews before finally settling on Sunset Bay. I had listened to her go on and on about how exclusive it was, how difficult it had been to get reservations, and how much they were spending to give the family this incredible experience. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I kept my mouth shut and smiled politely whenever she brought it up. When we arrived at the resort 3 days ago, I had watched Ryan's family's faces light up as they took in the stunning lobby with its soaring ceilings, hand-carved wooden sculptures, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The staff had greeted us warmly, and I'd caught Carlos, the resort manager, giving me a subtle nod of recognition before quickly returning his attention to the group. He was one of the few people who knew my real connection to the place, and we'd agreed beforehand that it was best to keep things low-key unless absolutely necessary. The first sign that this vacation was going to be different from what I'd expected came during our welcome dinner at the Ocean Breeze restaurant. The maitre d' had seated us at a beautiful table on the terrace with an unobstructed view of the sunset, and Margaret had immediately started taking photos for her social media accounts. Ryan's sister Jessica was gushing about the ambiance while her husband Michael was already planning what excursions they wanted to book. I was enjoying the peaceful atmosphere when Ryan's father David made an offhand comment that made my stomach drop. "You know, Emma," David said, cutting into his perfectly prepared sea bass, "you're so quiet. I keep forgetting you're even here." He chuckled as if he'd made a harmless joke, but there was something in his tone that felt dismissive. Ryan laughed along with his father, and I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. It wasn't the first time someone in his family had made me feel invisible, but something about being in this particular place, surrounded by the luxury that was technically mine, made the comment sting more than usual. The second day had been worse. I'd woken up excited about spending time with Ryan's family, thinking maybe we could finally bond over shared experiences and beautiful surroundings. Instead, I discovered that they had made plans for a private boat excursion without mentioning it to me. I only found out when I overheard Jessica on the phone with the concierge, confirming details for 5 people when there were clearly 6 of us on the trip. When I asked Ryan about it, he shrugged and said they'd thought I might prefer to stay at the resort and relax. "You're not really the adventure type, Em," he'd said, not even looking up from his phone. "Besides, the boat's pretty small. It would be cramped with 6 people. The casual way he excluded me from family activities, as if my presence was an inconvenience rather than something to be desired, left me feeling hollow inside. I'd spent that day alone by the pool, watching other families laugh and play together while periodically receiving photos in the family group chat from Ryan's boat trip. Photos that I wasn't in, captions that talked about amazing family memories being made. I wasn't even sure why they'd invited me on this vacation if they had no intention of including me in anything they did. By the 3rd day, a pattern had clearly emerged. Margaret had booked spa appointments for herself and Jessica, mentioning that they were having mother-daughter bonding time, and that I probably wouldn't be interested anyway. David and Michael had reserved a private cabana on the beach for what they called the men's afternoon, though Ryan was somehow included in this exclusively male gathering. Every meal, every activity, every moment of connection seemed to be designed around the assumption that I didn't belong. The breaking point came on the evening of the 3rd day, during what should have been a beautiful family dinner. We were seated at the same table we'd occupied that first night, and the conversation was flowing easily between Ryan's family members. They were discussing their plans for the next day, which apparently included a guided tour of a nearby wildlife reserve followed by a sunset horseback ride on the beach. These were activities I would have loved to participate in, adventures that sounded like exactly the kind of thing people should do together on a family vacation. "So that's 5 people for the wildlife tour," Margaret was saying, making notes in her phone. "And 5 people for the horseback riding. Perfect." I waited for someone to correct her, to point out that there were 6 people at the table and ask why she kept saying 5. Instead, the conversation continued as if I wasn't sitting right there. Ryan was nodding along, adding his input about what time they should leave and whether they needed to bring anything special. Jessica was asking about the difficulty level of the horseback riding, and Michael was wondering if they'd have opportunities to take good photos during the wildlife tour. "Excuse me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are we all going on these excursions together?" The table fell silent, and I could feel 5 pairs of eyes turning toward me. Margaret looked genuinely surprised, as if she'd forgotten I existed. "Oh, Emma," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "These activities are pretty physical and they're quite expensive. We thought you might prefer to enjoy the resort amenities. You know, get a massage or read by the pool. That seems more your speed." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not only was she excluding me from family activities, but she was doing it in a way that made it sound like she was being considerate of my limitations. As if I were some fragile creature who couldn't handle a simple wildlife tour or horseback ride. As if spending money on including me would be wasteful because I wasn't worth the investment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I'd actually love to do those things," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been horseback riding before, and I love wildlife. I think it sounds like fun." David laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "Emma, sweetheart, these aren't beginner activities. The wildlife tour involves hiking through pretty rough terrain, and the horseback riding is on the beach, which can be challenging if you're not experienced. We don't want anyone to get hurt or slow down the group." The implication was clear. I was the weak link, the inexperienced one who would ruin everyone else's fun. Ryan, who should have been defending me, who should have been insisting that his wife be included in family activities, just sat there looking uncomfortable. He wouldn't even meet my eyes. "Plus," Jessica added with a laugh that sounded forced, "we already made the reservations. It's too late to change the numbers now." I looked around the table, waiting for someone to suggest they could call and add one more person, waiting for someone to say that of course they wanted me to join them, that they'd figure out a way to make it work. Instead, Margaret patted my hand in a way that felt patronizing. "Don't worry, dear," she said. "You'll have a lovely time here at the resort. This place has such wonderful amenities. You can really pamper yourself while we're out having our little adventures." That's when it hit me. This wasn't an oversight or a miscommunication. This was deliberate. Ryan's family had planned this entire vacation with no intention of including me in their activities. They'd invited me along not because they wanted me there, but because it would have looked bad to leave me at home. I was the unwanted addition to their perfect family trip, tolerated, but not welcomed. I excused myself from the table, mumbling something about feeling tired, and walked back to the villa that Ryan and I were sharing. My hands were shaking as I closed the door behind me, and I could feel tears of frustration and humiliation building behind my eyes. I'd spent 3 days trying to connect with these people, trying to be the daughter-in-law and sister-in-law they might actually want to spend time with, and they'd made it clear that I was nothing more than an inconvenience. I sank down onto the plush sofa in our villa's living area, surrounded by luxury that felt hollow and meaningless in that moment. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Here I was, feeling excluded and unwanted in a place that I technically owned by people who had no idea that their perfect vacation was being funded by the woman they were treating like an afterthought. For 3 years, I'd been running my grandmother's resort empire from behind the scenes, making decisions about everything from staff hiring to menu changes to renovation projects. I'd chosen to keep a low profile, partly because I'd inherited the business so young, and partly because I'd never felt the need to prove my worth through displays of wealth or power. My grandmother had taught me that true strength came from competence and kindness, not from flaunting what you had. But sitting in that villa, feeling the weight of my in-laws' rejection and my husband's indifference, I began to wonder if my approach had been wrong. Maybe there were times when people needed to understand exactly who they were dealing with. Maybe there were moments when being quiet and humble wasn't the right choice. I thought about my grandmother, Elena, who had built Sunset Bay Resort from nothing back in the 1980s. She'd been a single mother with no college education and no business experience, but she'd had vision and determination. She'd started with a small beachfront guest house and gradually expanded it into one of the most exclusive resort destinations in Central America. By the time she passed away, she owned 3 luxury properties across Costa Rica and Panama, each one known for exceptional service and attention to detail. Elena had left everything to me, her only granddaughter, because she said I was the only family member who had ever shown genuine interest in the business and genuine care for the employees who made it run. She'd been teaching me about hospitality management since I was a teenager, bringing me to the resorts during summer breaks, and showing me everything from housekeeping standards to financial planning. When I inherited the properties, I'd been prepared to run them, but I'd never been prepared for the emotional weight of keeping such a big secret. Ryan knew I'd inherited some money from my grandmother, but he thought it was a modest amount that I'd invested wisely. He had no idea that my travel coordinator job involved making 6-figure decisions and managing teams of employees across multiple countries. I'd never felt the need to correct his assumptions, partly because I'd wanted him to love me for who I was rather than what I owned, and partly because I'd been raised to believe that true wealth was something you earned through your actions rather than something you flaunted through your possessions. But now, sitting alone in a villa that was technically mine while my husband's family planned activities that deliberately excluded me, I was starting to question whether my discretion had been wisdom or foolishness. Maybe if Ryan's family knew who I really was, they would treat me with more respect. Maybe if they understood that I wasn't just some quiet little wife but actually a successful businesswoman in my own right, they would see me as someone worth including in their plans. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Not just at Margaret and David and Jessica for their casual cruelty, but at Ryan for allowing it to happen. He'd sat there and watched his family exclude me from every activity, and he'd done nothing to stop it. He'd participated in their dismissal of me, agreeing that I probably wouldn't be interested or wouldn't be able to keep up. He'd chosen his family's comfort over his wife's dignity, and that betrayal hurt worse than anything his relatives had said. I walked out onto the villa's private terrace, looking out at the moonlight reflecting off the Pacific Ocean. This view, this moment, this entire experience should have been magical. Instead, it felt like a reminder of how alone I truly was. I was surrounded by luxury and beauty, but none of it mattered if I didn't have people who valued my presence and wanted to share experiences with me. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to spend the rest of this vacation sitting quietly while Ryan's family treated me like an unwelcome guest. I wasn't going to continue pretending that their behavior was acceptable or that I deserved to be excluded from activities I'd helped pay for. And I definitely wasn't going to let them continue believing that I was just some insignificant woman who should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention they threw my way. It was time for Ryan's family to learn exactly who they'd been dismissing. It was time for them to understand that the quiet, humble woman they'd been treating like an afterthought was actually the reason they were able to afford this luxurious vacation in the first place. And it was time for me to stop hiding behind my grandmother's lessons about humility and start embracing the power that came with the legacy she'd left me. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Carlos's number. As the resort manager, he'd been keeping me updated on how the family was enjoying their stay, but he'd been respecting my wishes to remain anonymous. Tomorrow, that was going to change. Tomorrow, Ryan's family was going to discover that the woman they'd been excluding from their perfect vacation was actually the owner of their perfect resort. The thought sent a mixture of anticipation and nervousness through me. I'd never used my position to prove a point or settle a score before. But then again, I'd never been in a situation where people who should have cared about me had made it so clear that they didn't. Tomorrow was going to be very interesting indeed. I woke up the next morning with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The Costa Rican sunrise was painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink outside my villa window, and for the first time since we'd arrived, I felt like I belonged in this beautiful place. Not because someone had graciously allowed me to be here, but because this was mine. Every palm tree swaying in the morning breeze, every perfectly manicured garden path, every luxury amenity that Ryan's family had been gushing about for days belonged to me. I could hear Ryan in the shower, probably getting ready for another day of family bonding that would mysteriously not include his wife. The thought no longer filled me with hurt and disappointment. Instead, it filled me with determination. Today was going to be different. Today, I was going to stop being the passive observer of my own vacation and start being the woman my grandmother had raised me to be. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a flowing white sundress that my grandmother had always said made me look confident and capable. I pulled my dark hair back into a sleek ponytail and applied just enough makeup to look polished without seeming like I was trying too hard. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone who belonged in a place like this, someone who deserved respect and consideration. Someone who had every right to demand better treatment from the people who claimed to care about her. Ryan emerged from the bathroom with a towel around his waist, his hair still dripping wet. He glanced at me briefly, taking in my appearance, with the distracted attention he'd been giving me throughout this entire trip. "You look nice," he said absently, already moving toward his suitcase to find clothes for the day. "The family's meeting for breakfast in 20 minutes. We're finalizing plans for the wildlife tour." The casual way he mentioned their plans, without asking if I wanted to join or even acknowledging that I'd been excluded, sparked something fierce inside me. "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected, "I have some things to take care of this morning. Business calls." Ryan looked surprised. In the 3 days we'd been here, I'd barely touched my phone except to take photos of the scenery. He probably couldn't imagine what business I could possibly have that was important enough to interfere with vacation time. "Can't it wait?" he asked, pulling on a polo shirt. "I mean, how urgent can travel coordination be?" If only he knew. "It can't wait," I said simply. "You go ahead with your family. I'll catch up with you later." He shrugged, already losing interest in the conversation. "Suit yourself. We'll probably be gone most of the day. Maybe you can get that massage Mom was talking about." After Ryan left to meet his family for breakfast, I sat on the edge of the bed and took several deep breaths. What I was about to do would change everything. There would be no going back to the quiet, unassuming role I'd been playing. Once Ryan's family knew who I really was, our entire dynamic would shift. The question was whether it would shift in a direction that made our relationship stronger, or whether it would reveal truths about their character that I wasn't prepared to face. I picked up my phone and called Carlos. He answered on the second. Ring, his voice warm and professional as always. "Good morning, Miss Emma. I hope you're enjoying your stay with us." "I am, Carlos, but I think it's time we had that conversation we discussed. Can you meet me in your office in about an hour?" There was a pause, and I could almost hear him thinking through the implications. Carlos had been managing Sunset Bay Resort for 2 years, and he'd been nothing but respectful of my desire to keep my ownership private during personal visits. But he also knew me well enough to understand that I didn't make requests like this lightly. Of course. Should I prepare? Anything specific? Just the usual ownership documentation and property records. And Carlos? After our meeting, I'd like you to make some arrangements for my husband's family. They seem to think certain activities are too expensive or too exclusive for their budget. I'd like to show them what real luxury looks like. Understood. I'll have everything ready. After ending the call, I walked out onto my villa's terrace and looked down at the resort's main pool area. I could see Ryan's family gathered around a table near the poolside restaurant, their heads bent together as they discussed their plans for the day. Margaret was gesturing animatedly, probably describing the wildlife tour she'd researched so carefully. Jessica was taking notes in her phone, making sure they didn't forget any important details. David was studying a map, tracing routes with his finger. Ryan was nodding along, contributing to their conversation in a way he rarely did. When I was around, they looked like a happy, cohesive family unit. The problem was that they looked just as happy and cohesive without me, as they did when I was sitting silently at their table, listening to their conversations without being invited to participate. That realization stung, but it also clarified something important for me. This wasn't about being included in their activities. This was about being respected as a person who deserved consideration and kindness. I spent the next hour walking through areas of the resort that guests rarely saw. I visited the employee break room, where I chatted with housekeeping staff about their working conditions and heard their suggestions for improving guest services. I stopped by the kitchen, where the head chef showed me the menu he was developing for next month and asked for my input on a new farm-to-table program he wanted to implement. I checked in with the activities coordinator, who updated me on booking, numbers, and guest satisfaction scores for the various excursions and amenities. These conversations reminded me why I love this business. It wasn't about the luxury or the prestige. It was about creating experiences that brought joy to people's lives and providing good jobs for the employees who made those experiences possible. My grandmother had taught me that hospitality was about more than just offering comfortable accommodations. It was about making people feel valued and cared for, about creating memories that would last long after they returned home. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was receiving more warmth and genuine interest from my employees than I was from my own family. The housekeeping supervisor asked about my well-being and whether there was anything she could do to make my stay more comfortable. The head chef insisted I try a new dessert he'd been perfecting and wanted my honest feedback. The activities coordinator thanked me for the recent raises I'd approved and told me how much the staff appreciated working for someone who truly cared about their welfare. When it was time for my meeting with Carlos, I felt grounded in my identity in a way I hadn't since arriving at the resort. I wasn't just Ryan's quiet wife or the in-law who didn't quite fit in with his family's dynamic. I was Emma Santos, owner of 3 luxury resorts and employer of more than 200 people. I was someone who made decisions that affected livelihoods and created experiences that brought happiness to thousands of guests every year. Carlos's office was located behind the front desk, accessible through a discreet door that most guests probably never noticed. The space was elegant but functional, with large windows overlooking the resort's central courtyard and walls lined with awards and certifications the resort had earned over the years. Carlos stood when I entered, offering me a seat in one of the comfortable leather chairs across from his desk. "The documentation you requested," he said, sliding a leather portfolio across the desk toward me. "Property deeds, business licenses, financial statements, and insurance policies. Everything that establishes your ownership and authority over Sunset Bay Resort." I opened the portfolio and flipped through the familiar documents. My grandmother's original business incorporation papers from 1983. The deed transfer that had made me the owner 3 years ago. Financial statements showing the resort's profitability and growth under my management. Insurance policies that protected both the property and our guests. It was all there. Black and white proof of something that Ryan's family couldn't even imagine. "I've also prepared some information about our premium services," Carlos continued, sliding another folder toward me. "Private helicopter tours, exclusive dining experiences, luxury yacht charters, personalized shopping excursions, services that we typically reserve for our most valued guests or those celebrating very special occasions." I smiled at his diplomacy. Carlos had worked in luxury hospitality long enough to understand that sometimes the most important conversations were the ones that weren't explicitly stated. He knew that something had happened to prompt this meeting, and he was prepared to help me address it in whatever way I deemed appropriate. "Tell me about the wildlife tour and horseback riding excursion that my husband's family booked for today," I said. Carlos pulled up information on his computer, his fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. "They booked our standard group, wildlife tour, which includes transportation to Manuel Antonio National Park, a guided hike through the rainforest, and lunch at a local restaurant. The horseback riding is our Sunset Beach ride, which is one of our most popular activities. Both are excellent experiences, though they're what we consider our entry-level adventure packages. What would be our premium alternative to those activities? For wildlife viewing, we offer private helicopter tours that cover multiple national parks and include landing at locations that are inaccessible by vehicle. Guests see scarlet macaws, 3-toed sloths, and other wildlife from perspectives that simply aren't available through ground-based tours. For horseback riding, we have a private beach and mountain trail experience that includes gourmet picnic, lunch and professional photography services. And the cost difference? The premium experiences cost approximately 4 times as much as the standard options. I nodded, understanding now why Margaret had been so concerned about the expense of including me in their plans. What she didn't realize was that the expensive activities she'd excluded me from were actually the budget-friendly options compared to what the resort could really offer. "I'd like you to make some upgrades to my family's reservations," I said. "Cancel their current bookings and arrange the premium alternatives instead. Make sure they understand that these upgrades are complimentary, provided by resort management in appreciation of their stay with us." Carlos made notes as I spoke, but I could see the questions in his eyes. This was highly unusual, and he was probably wondering what had prompted such an extravagant gesture toward guests who had been treating me with such casual dismissal. "There's one more thing," I said. "I want them to understand that these upgrades are being provided specifically because they're traveling with Emma Santos. Use my full name and make sure they understand the connection." Understanding dawned in Carlos's expression. "Of course. And would you like to be present when these arrangements are explained to them?" I think that would be appropriate. Very good. They're currently having lunch at Ocean Breeze before departing for their afternoon activities. Shall I approach them there? I looked at my watch. It was just past noon, which meant Ryan's family was probably halfway through their meal and getting excited about their upcoming adventures. In about 30 minutes, their understanding of this vacation, of their relationship with me, and of their own assumptions about wealth and privilege was going to be completely upended. Give me 15 minutes to get to the restaurant, I said. Then you can join us. I made my way through the resort's beautifully landscaped pathways, taking time to appreciate details that I'd had a hand in creating. The tropical plants had been selected not just for their beauty, but for their ability to provide natural cooling and privacy for guests. The stone pathways had been designed to blend seamlessly with the natural landscape, while providing easy access for guests with mobility challenges. The outdoor lighting fixtures had been positioned to highlight the resort's architectural features, while minimizing impact on the local wildlife. Every element of Sunset Bay Resort reflected my grandmother's philosophy of luxury that enhanced rather than dominated its natural setting. She'd taught me that true hospitality meant anticipating guests' needs before they even realized they had them, and creating environments where people could relax and connect with each other in meaningful ways. As I approached Ocean Breeze Restaurant, I could see Ryan's family seated at their usual table on the terrace. They looked relaxed and happy, laughing at something David had said while they enjoyed their lunch. Ryan was leaning back in his chair, looking more at ease than he'd seemed in months. For a moment, I felt a pang of regret about what I was about to do. They looked so content, so blissfully unaware that their entire understanding of their situation was about to change. But then I remembered the conversation from the night before, the casual way they'd excluded me from their plans, the dismissive comments about my limitations and interests. I remembered 3 days of feeling like an unwelcome guest at my own resort, 3 days of watching my husband choose his family's comfort over his wife's dignity. I took a seat at a small table nearby, positioning myself where I could observe their reactions but wasn't immediately obvious to them. A server approached me immediately, recognizing me and offering the kind of attentive service that was reserved for VIP guests. "Just water for now," I said quietly. "I'm waiting for someone." I didn't have to wait long. Carlos appeared at the entrance to the restaurant terrace, dressed in his formal management attire and carrying a leather portfolio similar to the one he'd shown me in his office. He moved with the kind of purposeful confidence that immediately commanded attention, and I saw several guests turning to look as he walked past their tables. When he reached Ryan's family's table, he stopped and smiled politely. "Good afternoon. I'm Carlos Rodriguez, the resort manager. I hope you're all enjoying your lunch." Margaret looked up with the slightly flustered expression she always wore when someone she perceived as important was paying attention to her. "Oh yes, everything has been wonderful. This resort is absolutely beautiful. I'm so pleased to hear that. I'm actually here because I have some exciting news about your afternoon activities. We've had some last-minute cancellations in our premium adventure packages, and I'd like to offer you complimentary upgrades to experiences that I think you'll find much more memorable than your current reservations." I watched Ryan's family exchange glances. Free upgrades to premium experiences were exactly the kind of thing that would appeal to people who were already stretching their budget to afford this vacation. "What kind of upgrades?" David asked, his tone trying to sound casual but clearly interested. Carlos opened his portfolio and pulled out glossy brochures showing the helicopter tours and private horseback experiences. "Instead of the group wildlife tour, we'd like to offer you a private helicopter excursion that covers 3 national parks and includes landing at locations where you'll have exclusive access to some of the most spectacular wildlife viewing in the country. And instead of the group sunset horseback ride, we're offering a private beach and mountain trail experience with gourmet dining and professional photography." Jessica's eyes went wide. "That sounds incredible. But those must be incredibly expensive. we couldn't possibly afford. As I mentioned, these are complimentary upgrades, Carlos said smoothly. Resort management is providing these experiences at no additional cost in appreciation of your stay with us. Resort management? Margaret repeated, clearly trying to understand why they were being singled out for such generous treatment. Is there some special reason we're being offered these upgrades? This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Carlos glanced in my direction briefly, and I nodded almost imperceptibly. Actually, yes, Carlos said. These upgrades are being provided specifically because you're traveling with Emma Santos. Mrs. Santos is one of our most valued guests, and we always ensure that her family receives our highest level of service. The silence that followed was profound. I watched the confusion spread across their faces as they processed what Carlos had just said. Ryan looked particularly bewildered, his brow furrowed as he tried to make sense of the information. I'm sorry, Ryan said slowly. Did you say Emma? Santos. My wife's name is Emma, but… Emma Santos, Carlos repeated clearly. The owner of Sunset Bay Resort. The impact of those words was immediate and dramatic. Margaret's hand froze halfway to her water glass. David's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Jessica looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Ryan went completely pale, staring at Carlos as if he'd just announced that gravity no longer applied. Owner? Margaret whispered. That's when I stood up from my table and walked over to join them. Every eye turned toward me, and I could see them struggling to reconcile the quiet, unassuming woman they'd been dismissing for 3 days with the revelation that I owned the entire resort they'd been enjoying. Hello, I said calmly, taking the empty chair at their table. I thought it was time we had a proper conversation about my work. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. I could practically hear the gears turning in their minds as they tried to process what Carlos had just revealed. Ryan's face had gone from pale to ashen, and he was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Margaret was opening and closing her mouth like a fish out of water, clearly struggling to find words. David had set down his fork and was gripping the edge of the table as if he needed something solid to anchor himself to reality. Jessica was the first to break the silence. Owner? She repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Emma, what is he talking about? I settled into my chair with the kind of calm confidence that my grandmother had always demonstrated during difficult business negotiations. Exactly what he said. I own Sunset Bay Resort, along with 2 other properties in Panama. I inherited them from my grandmother 3 years ago. But you work in travel coordination, Ryan said, his voice strained and confused. You've never mentioned owning anything like this. I do work in travel coordination, I replied evenly. I coordinate travel experiences for guests across 3 luxury resort properties. It's not technically a lie, just not the complete picture. Carlos cleared his throat diplomatically. Mrs. Santos has been very hands-on in the management of all her properties. She's implemented numerous improvements to guest services and employee benefits since taking ownership. We're very fortunate to work for someone who truly understands the hospitality industry. I could see Margaret struggling to reconcile this new information with her preconceived notions about me. But Emma, she said slowly, if you own this place, why didn't you say something when we were booking the vacation? Why did you let me spend weeks researching resorts and comparing prices? Because I wanted to see what kind of experience you would choose for our family vacation, I said, simply. And because I was curious about how you would treat me when you thought I was just Ryan's quiet little wife who works an ordinary job. The implications of my words settled over the table like a heavy blanket. I watched as understanding dawned in their eyes as they realized that every dismissive comment, every exclusion from activities, every casual insult had been witnessed not just by Ryan's wife, but by the owner of the very resort they'd been bragging about affording. David was the first to fully grasp the situation. All those things we said about you not being able to afford the activities, about the excursions being too expensive. Were particularly ironic, yes, I finished, considering that I set the prices for all those activities. Ryan looked like he might be sick. Emma, I had no idea. You never told me the full extent of what you inherited. You never asked, I said, maintaining my calm tone. In 3 years of marriage, you've never once inquired about the details of my work beyond accepting that it provided enough income to contribute to our household expenses. You knew I inherited money from my grandmother, but you never wondered how much or what form it took. But surely you can understand why this is such a shock, Margaret said, her voice taking on the defensive tone she used when she felt criticized. You've been so secretive about it. How are we supposed to know? I turned to look at her directly. Margaret, in the 3 days we've been here, how many times have you asked me about my interests, my experiences, or my opinions about anything? She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again as she realized she couldn't answer that question in a way that would reflect well on her. Let me make this easier for you, I continued. The answer is 0. You've made assumptions about who I am and what I'm capable of based on the fact that I don't feel the need to dominate conversations or prove my worth through constant self-promotion. You decided I was boring and limited without ever bothering to get to know me. Carlos stepped forward with perfect timing. If I may, Mrs. Santos has been instrumental in developing our adventure tourism programs. She's personally tested every excursion we offer, from the basic hiking tours to the most challenging mountain climbing expeditions. Last year, she completed a 5-day survival course in the Panamanian rainforest to better understand what our extreme adventure guests experience. I saw Jessica's eyes widen at this information. The woman they'd assumed couldn't handle a simple wildlife tour had actually spent 5 days living off the land in one of the world's most challenging environments. She's also fluent in Spanish and Portuguese, Carlos continued, and has been working with local indigenous communities to develop cultural exchange programs that provide sustainable income for families while offering our guests authentic educational experiences. The more Carlos shared, the more uncomfortable Ryan's family looked. Every assumption they'd made about my limitations and interests was being systematically dismantled. The quiet, unassuming woman they'd been treating like a burden was revealing herself to be someone far more accomplished and capable than any of them. Emma, Ryan said, his voice heavy with something that might have been regret. Why didn't you tell me any of this? Why have you been hiding so much from me? I studied my husband's face, looking for genuine remorse or understanding, but mostly seeing embarrassment and confusion. I haven't been hiding anything, Ryan. I've been waiting for you to show interest in my life beyond how it affects yours. When did you last ask me about my day at work? When did you last inquire about my goals or my challenges or my successes? He couldn't answer, and his silence spoke volumes about the state of our marriage. Furthermore, I continued, I wanted to be loved for who I am as a person, not for what I own. I wanted to know that the people in my life valued my character, my intelligence, and my company, not my bank account. Margaret shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Well, of course we value you as a person, Emma. It's just that you're so quiet, and you never seem interested in joining family discussions. I'm quiet because every time I've tried to contribute to family discussions, I've been ignored or dismissed, I said firmly. Do you remember last Christmas when I tried to share stories about the sustainable farming initiatives we'd implemented at our Panama property? David changed the subject to talk about his golf game. When I mentioned the scholarship program we'd established for local students, Jessica started talking about her new car. I could see the memories clicking into place for them, moments they'd probably forgotten, but that had stung me deeply at the time. And 3 days ago at dinner, when you made that comment about forgetting I was there, I said, looking directly at David, that wasn't a harmless joke. That was a reflection of how little attention you pay to anyone whose presence doesn't directly benefit you. David had the grace to look ashamed. Emma, I didn't mean— Yes, you did, I said simply. You meant exactly what you said. You just didn't expect there to be any consequences for saying it. Carlos stepped forward again. Mrs. Santos, shall I proceed with arranging the upgraded experiences for your family? I looked around the table at the 5 people who had spent 3 days treating me like an inconvenience. They were all staring at me now with a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and what I suspected was a newfound respect born more from my wealth than from any genuine appreciation of my character. Actually, Carlos, I'd like to make some different arrangements, I said. Please proceed with the premium upgrades for my family, but I won't be joining them. You won't be joining us? Ryan asked, his voice sharp with surprise. No. I have a better understanding now of how you all feel about my company, and I don't see any reason to impose my presence on activities you've already decided I'm not suited for. But Emma, Margaret said, her tone suddenly much warmer than it had been all week. Of course we want you to join us. We didn't realize. You didn't realize I could afford to participate? I finished. Or you didn't realize I was capable of handling the physical demands? Which part of your exclusion of me was supposed to be flattering? We made mistakes, David said, his voice unusually humble. We made assumptions, and we were wrong. But surely you can understand that this is all very surprising for us. What I understand, I said, standing up from the table, is that your treatment of me over the past 3 days has shown me exactly how you really feel about me as a person. The fact that you're suddenly interested in including me now that you know I'm wealthy tells me everything I need to know about your values. I turned to Carlos. Please make sure my family has everything they need for their upgraded experiences. Spare no expense. I want them to have the absolute best time possible. Of course, Mrs. Santos. And for yourself, would you like me to arrange any special activities? Actually, yes. I'd like to visit our sister property in Panama tomorrow. Can you arrange helicopter transport and notify the staff there that I'll be conducting a property inspection? Certainly. I'll have everything arranged within the hour. Ryan stood up abruptly. Emma, wait. You can't just leave. We need to talk about this. I paused and looked at him. We can talk, Ryan, but not right now. Right now, you need to go. Enjoy the premium experiences that Carlos has arranged for you. Experiences that, by the way, cost more than most people spend on their entire vacation. How much more? Jessica asked, apparently unable to stop herself from asking. Carlos consulted his tablet. The helicopter wildlife tour runs approximately $4,000 per person. The private horseback and dining experience is another $2,000 per person. With photography services and premium amenities, we're looking at roughly $36,000 total for the group. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see them doing mental calculations, realizing that the complimentary upgrades I was providing cost more than most people made in a year. $36,000, Margaret repeated faintly. Consider it an early birthday gift, I said casually, or a belated wedding present, or just a gesture of appreciation for all the years of family bonding we've shared. The sarcasm in my voice was unmistakable, and I could see them all shifting uncomfortably. Emma, Ryan said, his voice taking on a pleading tone, please don't. Leave tomorrow. We can work this out. We can start over. Can we? I asked. Because from where I'm sitting, the only thing that's changed is your knowledge of my net worth. Yesterday, you sat at this very table and watched your family exclude me from activities because they assumed I couldn't afford them or wouldn't be able to keep up. You didn't defend me. You didn't insist that your wife be included in family activities. You agreed with their assessment that I'd prefer to stay behind and get a massage. Ryan's face flushed red. I was trying to avoid conflict. I thought, You thought it was easier to let them treat me poorly than to stand up for me. I finished. You chose the path of least resistance, even when that path involved throwing your wife under the bus. I could see other diners beginning to notice our conversation, their curious glances reminding me that this was neither the time nor the place for a full airing of our family dysfunction. I think we should continue this conversation privately, I said, looking around the table. Carlos, please proceed with the arrangements we discussed. My family will be ready to depart for their helicopter tour in 2 hours. Absolutely, Mrs. Santos. Everything will be prepared according to your specifications. As I turned to leave, Margaret called out to me. Emma, wait. I want you to know that I'm sorry. We misjudged you, and we treated you poorly. I hope you can forgive us. I paused and looked back at her. Margaret, I appreciate the apology, but I need you to understand something. I'm not upset because you didn't know I was wealthy. I'm upset because you treated someone you believed was poor with disrespect and casual cruelty. The problem isn't that you misjudged my bank account. The problem is that you thought it was acceptable to exclude and dismiss someone based on your assumptions about their worth. We don't think that, she protested. We're not that kind of people. Your actions over the past 3 days suggest otherwise, I said gently but firmly. The fact that you're only apologizing now, after learning about my financial status, reinforces my point. I walked away from the table, leaving Ryan's family to process the conversation and prepare for their expensive afternoon adventures. As I made my way back through the resort, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was satisfaction in finally revealing the truth, in watching their assumptions crumble and their understanding of our family dynamic shift dramatically. But there was also sadness, because the conversation had confirmed my worst fears about how they really saw me. Back in my villa, I sat on the terrace and called my mother. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar. Emma, sweetheart, how's the family vacation going? It's been enlightening, I said, and then I told her everything, about the exclusions, about Ryan's passivity, about the revelation and its aftermath. My mother listened without interrupting, making sympathetic sounds at appropriate moments. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Your grandmother would be proud of how you handled this, she finally said. Elena always believed that people showed their true character when they thought there were no consequences for their actions. I keep wondering if I should have handled it differently, I admitted. Maybe I should have been more direct from the beginning instead of waiting to see how they would treat me. No, my mother said firmly. You did exactly the right thing. You gave them every opportunity to treat you with kindness and respect, and they chose not to. That's not your fault, and it's not your responsibility to fix. But what about Ryan? What about our marriage? That's a conversation you'll need to have with him, she said gently. But remember that a marriage requires both partners to value and respect each other. If he can't see your worth independent of your wealth, then you have bigger problems than family vacation dynamics. After ending the call with my mother, I spent the rest of the afternoon working. I reviewed financial reports from all 3 properties, approved staff scheduling requests, and worked with my Panama property manager to plan improvements to the guest experience. It felt good to focus on something productive, something that reminded me of my competence and value beyond the family drama. As evening approached, I could hear the helicopters returning from the wildlife tour. I stayed on my terrace, watching as Ryan's family disembarked and made their way back to their villas. Even from a distance, I could see their excitement and animation as they discussed what they'd experienced. The $36,000 adventure had clearly been everything Carlos had promised it would be. Ryan appeared at my villa door just as the sun was beginning to set. He looked tired and somewhat overwhelmed, carrying the weight of everything that had been revealed earlier in the day. "Can we talk?" he asked. I gestured to the chairs on the terrace, and we sat facing each other as the sky began to turn pink and orange. That was incredible, he said, referring to the helicopter tour. I've never seen anything like it. The views, the wildlife, the exclusive access to places that regular tourists never get to see. It was once-in-a-lifetime stuff. I'm glad you enjoyed it, I said sincerely. Emma, I need to apologize. For everything. For not defending you, for not standing up to my family, for not taking more interest in your work and your life. I've been a terrible husband. His words were what I'd wanted to hear, but they felt hollow after everything that had happened. Ryan, I appreciate the apology, but I need to understand something. Are you apologizing because you genuinely realize you've treated me poorly? Or are you apologizing because you're embarrassed that your wife turned out to be wealthier than you realized? He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the ocean. I think it's both, he said finally, and I hate that I can't separate those feelings. At least he was being honest. What does that mean for us? I don't know, he admitted. I keep thinking about all the times I dismissed your opinions, or didn't pay attention when you talked about work. I keep realizing how much I don't actually know about you, about your goals and your dreams and your accomplishments. That's not the foundation for a good marriage. No, it's not, I agreed. We sat in silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon, both of us lost in our own thoughts about the future of our relationship and what it would take to rebuild trust and respect between us. The next morning arrived with the kind of perfect Caribbean sunshine that usually made everything seem possible, but the atmosphere in our villa felt heavy with unspoken tensions. Ryan had spent most of the night lying awake beside me, and I could feel his restless energy even in the darkness. We'd both been thinking about our conversation on the terrace, about the cracks in our marriage that had been exposed by the events of this vacation. I was already dressed and ready for my helicopter departure to Panama when Ryan finally spoke. I still can't believe you're leaving today. We have 3 more days here together. You have 3 more days here with your family, I corrected gently. I have business to attend to, and honestly, I think some space will be good for all of us right now. He sat up in bed, running his hands through his hair in the gesture I knew meant he was feeling overwhelmed. Emma, I know I messed up badly. We all did. But walking away isn't going to solve anything. I'm not walking away, I said, checking my phone for the message from Carlos about the helicopter schedule. I'm taking care of my responsibilities as a business owner, something I should have been doing more assertively all along. But this feels like punishment, like you're making us pay for not knowing who you really were. I stopped packing my small overnight bag and looked at him directly. Ryan, this isn't about punishment. This is about me finally prioritizing my own well-being and my business obligations instead of trying to fit into a family dynamic that clearly doesn't value my presence. Before he could respond, there was a knock at our villa door. I opened it to find Carlos standing there with a tablet and his usual professional smile. Good morning, Mrs. Santos. The helicopter is fueled and ready for departure whenever you are. I also have some updates on your family's activities for today that you might want to review before you leave. Of course, come in. Carlos stepped into our villa's living area, and I could see Ryan watching him with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. The resort manager's deference to me was making it impossible for Ryan to pretend that yesterday's revelations hadn't fundamentally changed our family dynamic. Your family's private yacht charter for today includes deep-sea fishing, snorkeling at 3 exclusive reef locations, and a gourmet lunch prepared by our executive chef, Carlos explained, showing me the itinerary on his tablet. The photographer will document the entire experience, and they'll return by sunset for a private dining experience on the beach. That sounds perfect. What's the total cost for today's activities? Approximately $42,000 for the group. I heard Ryan make a small choking sound behind me, but I didn't turn around. Excellent. Please make sure they have everything they need. Sunscreen, appropriate clothing, any medications they might require for seasickness. Already taken. care of. We've also prepared gift bags for each family member with commemorative items from today's excursion and some specialty products from our resort boutique. Thank you, Carlos. You always think of everything. After Carlos left, Ryan stood in the middle of our villa looking like he'd been hit by a truck. $42,000, he repeated. You're spending $42,000 on a single day of activities for my family. I'm providing experiences that my guests deserve, I said simply. Your family is staying at my resort, so they're my guests. But Emma, that's more than I make in 6 months. That's more than most people spend on a new car. I sat down in one of the villa's comfortable armchairs and looked at my husband. Ryan, I think it's time we had a completely honest conversation about money and what it means to both of us. He sat down across from me, his expression wary but attentive. When I inherited my grandmother's properties, I also inherited the responsibility of running a business that employs hundreds of people and serves thousands of guests every year, I began. The money I spend on premium experiences isn't just personal extravagance. It's an investment in the reputation and success of my resorts. But surely you don't spend this kind of money on every guest who stays here. No, but I spend this kind of money when it serves a purpose. Yesterday, I learned that your family had formed opinions about me based on assumptions about my financial limitations. Today, I'm demonstrating that those assumptions were not just wrong, but spectacularly wrong. Ryan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. So this is about proving a point. Partly, yes, but it's also about something much more important. For 3 years, I've been hiding a significant part of my identity because I wanted to be loved for who I am, rather than what I own. What I've learned from this vacation is that your family doesn't actually love me at all. They've been tolerating me because they had to, but they've never made any effort to know me or appreciate my qualities. That's not true, Ryan protested. But his voice lacked conviction. Ryan, your mother spent weeks planning this vacation without once asking for my input. Your father makes jokes about forgetting I exist. Your sister schedules activities for everyone except me. And you sit there and let it all happen, because confronting them would be uncomfortable for you. He couldn't argue with any of those points because they were all demonstrably true. The money I'm spending today isn't really about showing off my wealth, I continued. It's about forcing everyone to confront the reality that they've been treating someone with profound respect and disregard. If they can suddenly appreciate my company now that they know I'm wealthy, then their appreciation was never about me, as a person. So you're testing us. I already tested you, Ryan. The test was whether you would value and defend your wife when you thought she was just an ordinary person with an ordinary job. You failed that test. The words hung in the air between us, harsh but undeniably accurate. Ryan's face flushed with shame and anger, though I suspected the anger was directed more at himself than at me. What do you want from me, Emma? What do I need to do to fix this? I stood up and walked to the villa's window, looking out at the resort grounds where I could see his family gathering near the marina for their yacht excursion. They looked excited and happy, probably discussing the incredible experiences they'd had the day before and anticipating the adventures ahead. I don't know if this can be fixed, I said honestly. I don't know if we can build a healthy marriage when you've spent 3 years being completely uninterested in my professional life and personal ambitions. But I am interested, he said desperately. I want to know everything. I want to understand. Your business, your goals, your dreams. I want to be the husband you deserve. I turned to face him. Ryan, do you want those things because you love me and realize you've been taking me for granted? Or do you want them because you've discovered that I'm wealthy and successful, and you're worried about what you might lose if our marriage ends? He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. The fact that he had to think about the question told me everything I needed to know. I need to go, I said, picking up my bag. The helicopter is waiting, and I have meetings scheduled in Panama this afternoon. When will you be back? Tomorrow evening. Your family's yacht should return around sunset today, and they have another full day of premium experiences planned for tomorrow. By the time I return, you'll all have had time to process everything that's happened and decide how you want to move forward. Emma, wait. Ryan stood up and moved toward me. Before you go, I need you to know that I love you. Whatever happens, whatever mistakes I've made, I do love you. I studied his face, looking for the sincerity I desperately wanted to see there. I love you too, Ryan, but love isn't enough if it's not accompanied by respect, support, and genuine interest in each other's lives. The helicopter ride to Panama was spectacular, offering views of pristine coastline and emerald rainforest that never failed to take my breath away. As we flew over the landscape that had become so familiar to me over the years, I felt some of the tension from the morning beginning to ease. This was my world, the world my grandmother had built and entrusted to me. Here, I wasn't Ryan's quiet wife or the in-law who didn't quite fit in. Here, I was Emma Santos, business owner and employer, someone whose decisions mattered and whose presence was valued. My Panama property, Casa Serena, was smaller than Sunset Bay but equally luxurious in its own way. Nestled into a hillside overlooking the Pacific, it offered an intimate retreat experience for guests who preferred privacy and exclusivity over larger resort amenities. The staff there had been with the property for years, many of them since my grandmother's time, and they greeted me with the warmth of family. "Miss Emma," called Maria, the head of housekeeping, as I walked into the main lobby. "We weren't expecting you today, but what a wonderful surprise." I decided to combine some personal travel with a property inspection, I explained. "How are things going here?" "Very well. We're at full capacity this month, and guest satisfaction scores are at an all-time high. The new spa treatments you approved have been very popular, and the yoga retreats are booked solid through the end of the year." I spent the afternoon walking through Casa Serena with the property manager, reviewing maintenance schedules, discussing staff development opportunities, and planning improvements to the guest experience. It felt good to focus on concrete problems with clear solutions, to be in an environment where my expertise was respected and my decisions were implemented without question. That evening, I had dinner alone on the terrace of the owner's suite, a private space that overlooked the entire property and offered stunning views of the sunset over the Pacific. As I watched the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and pink, I thought about the conversation I'd had with Ryan that morning and the choices that lay ahead of me. My phone buzzed with a text message from Ryan. "The yacht trip was incredible. I've never experienced anything like it. Thank you for arranging such an amazing day for my family." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "I'm glad they enjoyed it." A few minutes later, another message arrived. "My parents want to talk to you when you get back. They have some things they want to say." "I'm sure they do," I typed back. The third message came an hour later. "Emma, I've been thinking all day about what you said this morning. You're right about everything. I haven't been the husband you deserve, and I haven't shown proper interest in your life and career. I want to change that, but I understand if you need time to decide whether our marriage is worth saving." I set my phone aside without responding. The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted to say to Ryan, or whether anything he could say would change the fundamental problems in our relationship. 3 days of family vacation had revealed issues that went much deeper than casual thoughtlessness or temporary insensitivity. The next morning, I woke early and spent time with the Casa Serena staff, joining the housekeeping team for their morning briefing and helping the kitchen staff prepare breakfast for guests. It was something my grandmother had taught me to do regularly, staying connected to the daily operations that made the guest experience possible. "Miss Emma," said Carlos, the head chef, "the guests in Villa 3 were asking about the owner of the property." They've been so impressed with their stay that they want to know more about the person who created this place. What did you tell them? That the owner is a young woman who inherited the property from her grandmother and has continued the tradition of exceptional hospitality. They were very impressed to learn that someone their age could run such a successful operation. The comment made me smile. It was a reminder that there were people in the world who could appreciate competence and achievement regardless of age or gender, people who valued results over assumptions. I flew back to Sunset Bay in the early afternoon, arriving to find the resort buzzing with activity. Carlos met me at the helicopter landing pad with updates on my family's experiences during my absence. The yacht excursion yesterday was a tremendous success, he reported as we walked toward the main resort buildings. Your family caught several large fish, explored 3 different reef systems, and had what they described as the best day of their vacation so far. And today? They're currently enjoying the private beach cabana experience with personalized service, gourmet food and beverage service, and water sports equipment. This evening, they have reservations for our exclusive 7-course tasting menu with wine. Pairings. Excellent. What's the total cost for their stay so far? Carlos consulted his tablet. With all the premium upgrades and exclusive experiences, we're looking at approximately $130,000 for the week. The number was staggering, even for someone accustomed to luxury hospitality pricing. I had effectively provided Ryan's family with a vacation that cost more than many people's annual salaries, all while they continued to process the revelation that the woman they'd been excluding and dismissing was the reason they could afford such experiences. Carlos, I want you to prepare a detailed invoice showing all the services and experiences my family has received, along with the standard pricing for each item. I won't be charging them, of course, but I want them to understand the full value of what they've experienced. Of course, Mrs. Santos. Should I present this to them directly? No, I'll handle that conversation myself. As I made my way back to my villa, I could see Ryan's family enjoying their private beach cabana setup. They looked relaxed and happy, clearly having adapted quickly to the luxury lifestyle that my money had made possible. The sight filled me with a complex mixture of emotions. I was glad they were enjoying themselves, but I was also acutely aware that their enjoyment was entirely dependent on resources they had spent years dismissing as unimportant. Ryan was waiting for me in our villa when I arrived, sitting on the couch with a serious expression that suggested he'd been doing a lot of thinking during my absence. How was Panama? He asked. Productive. How was your family's yacht excursion? Incredible. Emma, I need to tell you what happened yesterday after you left. I sat down in the chair across from him, curious about what had transpired in my absence. After the yacht trip, when we were having dinner, my mother started talking about how amazing all these experiences have been, and how grateful she was for the upgrades. Then my father made a comment about how you must have some serious connections in the hospitality industry to arrange such incredible treatment. And I told them the truth, that you don't have connections in the hospitality industry. You are the hospitality industry, at least for this part of Central America. I explained about your inheritance, about the multiple properties you own, about the fact that every luxury they've been enjoying this week exists because of your business acumen and your grandmother's legacy. I waited for him to continue, sensing there was more to this story. My mother cried, Ryan said, quietly. She actually cried when she realized how badly she's treated you over the years. She kept saying that she'd been so focused on what she thought you lacked that she never bothered to discover what you actually possessed. And your father? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said that he's spent his whole life judging people by their willingness to promote themselves and their achievements, and he never considered that some of the most successful people might be the ones who don't feel the need to brag about their accomplishments. I felt a flicker of something that might have been hope, but I was cautious about reading too much into secondhand reports of their reactions. Jessica was probably the most affected, Ryan continued. She kept talking about all the times she'd made assumptions about your interests and capabilities, about how she'd never even asked you about your work or your goals. She said she felt ashamed of how superficial her understanding of you has been. Those are nice sentiments, I said carefully. But Ryan, people often feel bad when they realize they've misjudged someone wealthy and successful. The question is whether they would feel equally bad about misjudging someone poor and struggling. I think they would, he said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. I think this experience has made all of us realize that we've been judging people based on surface appearances rather than taking the time to really know them. Maybe. Or maybe they're just embarrassed that they were cruel to someone who turned out to be more powerful than they realized. Ryan was quiet for a moment, clearly struggling with the implications of what I was saying. Emma, what do you need from us to move forward? What would it take for you to believe that we can change, that we can do better? I looked at my husband, this man I'd married 3 years ago with such hope and optimism about our future together. I need time, Ryan. I need to see whether the changes in your family's behavior are genuine or just a response to learning about my wealth. And I need to see whether you can learn to value me as a partner and an individual, not just as the person who happens to be married to you. How much time? I don't know, but I do know that I'm not going to continue accepting treatment that makes me feel invisible and unimportant. I'm worth more than that, and I deserve better from the people who claim to love me. That evening, I found myself standing on the terrace of our villa, watching the sun set over the Pacific Ocean for what might be the last time as Ryan's wife. The thought wasn't as painful as I'd expected it to be. Instead, it felt like the natural conclusion to a relationship that had been slowly dying from neglect and misunderstanding for longer than either of us had been willing to admit. Ryan was getting ready for dinner with his family, the final group meal of their vacation. They'd invited me to join them, of course, but their invitation felt different now. There was an eagerness to it, an almost desperate quality that suggested they were trying to compensate for years of casual dismissal with sudden, intense attention. I'd declined politely, telling them I had some business calls to make, which wasn't entirely untrue. The truth was, I wanted to observe them from a distance one more time. I wanted to see how they interacted when they thought I wasn't watching, when they didn't feel the pressure to perform their newfound appreciation for me. People's unguarded moments often revealed more about their true character than their carefully considered responses to crisis situations. From my terrace, I could see the private dining area Carlos had arranged for them on the beach. The table was set with crisp white linens, crystal glasses, and fresh tropical flowers. Torches had been placed around the perimeter of the dining space, creating an intimate atmosphere as darkness fell. It was the kind of romantic, exclusive experience that travel magazines featured in their most luxurious destination articles. I watched as Ryan's family took their seats, their voices carrying on the evening breeze. Even from a distance, I could see the change in their body language. They were more animated than they'd been during any of our shared meals, more engaged with each other, more excited about their surroundings. The irony wasn't lost on me that they seemed to be having their best family bonding experience of the entire vacation, now that I wasn't there to include or exclude. My phone rang, interrupting my observations. It was my mother, calling for our evening check-in that had become routine during my business trips. "How was Panama?" she asked after we'd exchanged greetings. Peaceful, productive. It reminded me why I love the hospitality business. "And how are things with Ryan's family?" I told her about Ryan's report of their conversations after the yacht trip, about their apparent remorse and newfound understanding of how poorly they'd treated me. My mother listened thoughtfully, asking occasional questions, but mostly letting me process my thoughts out loud. "Do you believe their change of heart is genuine?" she asked when I'd finished. "I honestly don't know. Part of me wants to believe that people can grow and change, that this experience has genuinely opened their eyes to their own behavior. But another part of me wonders if they're just embarrassed and trying to make amends because they realize they misjudged someone with power and influence. Those aren't mutually exclusive possibilities, my mother pointed out. They can be both embarrassed about their behavior and genuinely committed to changing it. True. But how do I tell the difference? How do I know if their apologies are sincere or just damage control? Time will tell, she said simply. People can maintain a facade for a few days or even a few weeks, but eventually their true nature shows through. The question is whether you're willing to invest the time and emotional energy required to find out. After ending the call with my mother, I remained on the terrace, thinking about her words. Was I willing to invest more time in relationships that had already proven so disappointing? Was there enough foundation of genuine affection and respect to build something better, or were we all just going through the motions because walking away felt too difficult? The evening air was warm and humid, filled with the scent of blooming jasmine from the resort's gardens. I could hear the distant sound of waves breaking against the shore, a rhythmic soundtrack that had become as familiar to me as my own heartbeat over the years of visiting and managing this property. This place had always been my sanctuary, my connection to my grandmother's legacy and my own sense of purpose. Tonight, it felt like a crossroads where I would need to choose between the comfort of familiar disappointments and the uncertainty of demanding more from the people in my life. Around 10 o'clock, I heard footsteps on the path leading to my villa. Through the glass doors, I could see Margaret approaching, walking slowly and deliberately, like someone who had rehearsed what they were going to say. She was alone, which surprised me. I'd expected that if anyone came to talk to me, it would be Ryan, or perhaps the entire family together. I opened the door before she could knock, and she looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen from her before. Gone was the confident, slightly condescending demeanor she usually wore. Instead, she looked uncertain and vulnerable, like someone who'd been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about herself. Emma, I hope you don't mind me coming by so late. I know you said you had business calls to make, but I was hoping we could talk privately. I stepped aside to let her in, gesturing toward the seating area in the villa's living room. Of course. Can I get you anything to drink? No, thank you. I just need to say some things that I should have said years ago. We sat across from each other, and Margaret took a deep breath before beginning to speak. Her hands were trembling slightly, and I could see that this conversation was costing her considerable effort. I've been thinking constantly since yesterday about the kind of person I've been to you, and I'm ashamed of myself. Not because I didn't know you were wealthy, but because I treated someone with such casual disregard regardless of their financial status. I remained quiet, wanting to hear what she had to say without interrupting or influencing her words. This was her moment to be honest, and I owed it to both of us to listen without judgment. When Ryan first brought you home to meet us, I had such specific ideas about the kind of woman I wanted him to marry. Someone outgoing and social, someone who would fit seamlessly into our family dynamic, someone who shared our interests and our lifestyle. You were so different from what I'd imagined that I never gave you a fair chance. She paused, looking down at her hands folded in her lap. I could see her struggling with the weight of her own admissions, the difficulty of acknowledging years of behavior that she now recognized as cruel and unfair. I convinced myself that you were just shy, and that you'd eventually open up and become more like the daughter-in-law I'd envisioned. When that didn't happen, I decided you were boring and limited, and I stopped trying to get to know you. I stopped asking questions about your life, your interests, your goals. I treated you like a piece of furniture that came with Ryan, something to be tolerated rather than appreciated. The honesty in her words was surprising and painful to hear. It confirmed what I'd suspected but had never had confirmed so directly. For years, I'd wondered if I was being overly sensitive about Margaret's treatment of me, if perhaps I was misinterpreting her behavior or expecting too much from a relationship that was inherently complicated by family dynamics. This vacation has shown me that you're not boring or limited at all. You're thoughtful and observant and incredibly accomplished. You've been quietly running a business empire while I was dismissing you as someone who had nothing interesting to contribute to family conversations. The problem wasn't that you didn't have anything to say. The problem was that I never created space for you to say it. Margaret looked up at me then, her eyes bright with tears she was trying not to shed. The vulnerability in her expression was something I'd never seen before, and it made me realize that this conversation was as difficult for her as it was necessary for both of us. I know that apologizing doesn't undo years of thoughtless behavior, but I need you to know that I see you now. I see your strength and your intelligence and your grace in handling our family's dysfunction. I see the kindness you've shown us even when we didn't deserve it. And I see the patience you've had with Ryan, who clearly didn't appreciate what he had in you. What about the money? I asked quietly. How much of this change in perspective is about learning that I'm wealthy? Margaret was quiet for a long moment, clearly considering her answer carefully. I appreciated that she didn't rush to give me the response she thought I wanted to hear, but instead took time to examine her own motivations honestly. I'd be lying if I said the money doesn't matter to how I'm seeing you now, she said finally. Learning that you own this resort, that you're a successful businesswoman, that you have the kind of financial independence that most people only dream of, it forced me to completely reconsider my assumptions about you. She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts and find the right words to express something complex and uncomfortable. But here's what I've realized over the past 2 days. The money isn't what impresses me most about you. What impresses me is that you had all this wealth and power, and you never used it to make us feel small or insignificant. You never threw it in our faces when we were treating you poorly. You never demanded special treatment or recognition. You just quietly took care of your responsibilities and tried to be a good family member despite getting very little appreciation in return. I felt something loosening in my chest, a tension I'd been carrying for years starting to ease. Margaret's words felt genuine in a way that simple apologies hadn't. She was grappling with the complexity of her own reactions and admitting to the less flattering aspects of her character change. I also realized, she continued, that if you had been a struggling artist or a teacher or a social worker, someone with little money but the same intelligence and character, I should have treated you with exactly the same respect and kindness. The fact that I didn't says something terrible about my values and my character. This admission struck me as particularly important because it addressed the core issue that had been troubling me. Was their newfound respect for me genuine, or was it simply a reaction to learning about my wealth? Margaret's acknowledgement that she should have treated me well regardless of my financial status suggested a level of self-awareness that gave me hope for real change. What do you want to happen now? I asked. I want a chance to know you properly. I want to ask you about your work and your goals and your dreams. I want to understand what makes you happy and what challenges you face and how I can be a better mother-in-law to you. I want to include you in family conversations and activities because I value your presence, not because it's the polite thing to do. And if our marriage doesn't survive this, if Ryan and I decide we can't work through our problems, Margaret's face fell slightly, but she nodded with understanding. Then I hope you'll still give me a chance to be a better person. I hope you'll let me prove that I can change regardless of what happens between you and Ryan. We talked for another hour, covering years of misunderstandings and missed opportunities for connection. Margaret shared stories about her own struggles with feeling accepted in social situations, helping me understand some of the insecurity that had driven her need to create an inner circle that excluded others. She talked about her fear of not being a good enough mother-in-law, her anxiety about whether her family was sophisticated enough for the lifestyle she thought we should be living. I told her about my grandmother's influence on my life and my approach to business, about the challenges of inheriting so much responsibility at a young age, about my hopes for continuing Elena's legacy of ethical hospitality management. I shared Some of the loneliness I'd felt in trying to balance my private nature with the need to be an effective leader, about the difficulty of making decisions that affected so many people's livelihoods. "I never realized you carried so much responsibility," Margaret said at one point. "When you mentioned your work, I always pictured something small and administrative. I never imagined you were making decisions about major business operations and managing hundreds of employees. I didn't talk about it much because I wanted to be accepted for who I was as a person, not for what I owned. But I think I went too far in the other direction and didn't give any of you the chance to know the real me. We should have been more curious about your life regardless of how much you volunteered," Margaret replied. "Good family members ask questions and show interest in each other's work and passions. We failed you in that regard." By the time Margaret left my villa, something fundamental had shifted between us. I wasn't ready to forget years of dismissive treatment, but I was willing to believe that people could genuinely change when confronted with the consequences of their behavior. Her willingness to examine her own motivations critically and to admit to unflattering truths about herself suggested a level of character growth that I hadn't expected. The next morning was our final day at Sunset Bay Resort. Ryan's family would be flying home that afternoon, while Ryan and I had originally planned to stay an extra day for some private time together. Given everything that had happened, I wasn't sure if that plan still made sense. We needed to have some serious conversations about the future of our marriage, but I also wanted to give both of us time to process the emotional intensity of the past few days. I woke early and walked down to the beach, enjoying the peaceful solitude of sunrise over the Pacific. The resort's grounds were quiet, except for the sound of waves and the distant chatter of staff preparing for the day ahead. I found myself thinking about my grandmother and what she would have done in my situation. Elena had been a practical woman who believed in giving people opportunities to prove themselves, but didn't waste time on relationships that consistently caused more pain than joy. She'd taught me that forgiveness didn't require accepting ongoing mistreatment, and that sometimes the kindest thing you could do for everyone involved was to step away from situations that brought out the worst in people. But she'd also believed in the possibility of redemption, in people's capacity to grow and change when they were willing to do the hard work of examining their own behavior. She'd given second chances to employees who'd made mistakes, to business partners who'd disappointed her, to family members who'd let her down. The key was that those second chances came with clear expectations and firm boundaries. As I walked along the water's edge, I thought about the conversation I'd had with Margaret the night before, and the similar conversations I would probably need to have with David and Jessica before they left. There was something powerful about people taking responsibility for their behavior without making excuses or trying to shift blame. It suggested a level of maturity and self-awareness that was necessary for real change. I was still walking on the beach when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Ryan approaching, dressed in shorts and a t-shirt, his hair still messy from sleep. He looked like he'd been awake for a while, possibly wrestling with the same kinds of thoughts that had kept me from sleeping well. "I thought I might find you here," he said, falling into step beside me. "You always loved watching the sunrise. It's peaceful. It helps me think." We walked in comfortable silence for several minutes, both of us lost in our own thoughts about the conversation we needed to have. The morning air was cool and fresh, a welcome relief from the emotional intensity that had characterized most of our interactions over the past few days. "Emma, I need to tell you something," Ryan said finally. "Yesterday, while you were in Panama, I had a long conversation with my father." I glanced at him, curious about what David might have said in a private moment. Their relationship had always been somewhat competitive, with David pushing Ryan to achieve more success and recognition in his career and personal life. He told me that he's always seen our marriage as temporary, not because he thought we'd get divorced, but because he thought you'd eventually realize you could do better than me and leave. The revelation was surprising, though perhaps not as shocking as it should have been. David had never been particularly subtle about his opinions, and I'd always sensed that he saw me as settling for less than I deserved in marrying Ryan. He said he's watched you over the years and recognized that you were more intelligent, more accomplished, more emotionally mature than any of us gave you credit for. He said he kept waiting for you to get tired of being underappreciated and find someone who would value you properly. What did you say to that? I told him he was right. You could do better than me. You deserve someone who celebrates your successes instead of ignoring them. Someone who defends you instead of choosing the path of least resistance. Someone who sees your worth regardless of your bank account. Ryan stopped walking and turned to face me, his expression more serious than I'd ever seen it. The morning sun was backlighting his figure, making it difficult to read his facial expressions clearly, but I could hear the weight of emotion in his voice. Emma, I want to be that person for you. I want to be the husband you deserve. But I understand if you don't think I'm capable of changing, and I understand if you're not willing to give me the chance to try. I studied his face, looking for signs of the man I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago. He was there, underneath the defensiveness and embarrassment, but I wasn't sure if that was enough to rebuild a marriage that had been damaged by years of neglect and misunderstanding. What would change look like, Ryan? What would be different if I decided to give our marriage another chance? Everything, he said immediately, then paused and seemed to consider his words more carefully. I want to know about your work. Really, know about it. I want to visit your properties, meet your employees, understand the challenges you face and the goals you're working toward. I want to be your partner in business decisions, if you'll let me. Or at least be someone you can talk to about the pressures and responsibilities of running multiple companies. This was encouraging to hear because it suggested he understood that my work wasn't just a job, but a central part of my identity and purpose. For years, he'd treated my career as something that happened to bring in money, rather than something that gave my life meaning and structure. And your family? I want to be the husband who stands up for you when someone treats you poorly, regardless of who that someone is. I want to be the person who makes sure you're included in family activities and conversations. I want to be your advocate and your supporter, not just someone who expects you to adapt to everyone else's preferences. His words sounded sincere, but I'd learned over the years that good intentions weren't always enough to create lasting change. People often made promises in moments of crisis that they couldn't sustain once the immediate pressure was removed. Ryan, I need to see these changes in action over time. I need to know that you're committed to this growth regardless of whether it's convenient or comfortable for you. I need to know that you value me as a person and a partner, not just as your wife. What does that mean practically? I thought about the question, trying to articulate what I needed in concrete terms rather than abstract concepts. This was important because vague commitments to do better rarely translated into meaningful behavioral changes. It means I need time to see whether your behavior actually changes, not just your words. It means I need space to rebuild my trust in you and in our relationship. It means I need to know that you're doing this work because you want to be a better husband, not because you're afraid of losing access to my wealth. How much time? I don't know. 6 months? A year? However long it takes for me to believe that the changes are real and sustainable. Ryan nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of what I was asking for. I could see him processing the implications of a long-term separation and the uncertainty about whether our marriage would survive it. What would that look like? Would we live separately? Would we see other people? I think we should start with counseling, both individual and couples therapy. I think you should spend some time really examining why you've been so passive in our marriage and what you need to do to become a more engaged partner. I think I need to work on understanding what I want from a relationship and what I'm willing to accept versus what I deserve. And in the meantime? In the meantime, we try to rebuild our friendship. We spend time together without the pressure of trying to fix our marriage immediately. We focus on getting to know each other again, on remembering what we liked about each other in the first place. We had reached the end of the beach and stood looking out at the horizon where the morning sun was climbing higher in the sky. The ocean stretched endlessly before us, a reminder of the vastness of possibilities that lay ahead, regardless of what decisions we made about our relationship. Ryan was quiet for a long time, and I could see him processing the implications of what I was proposing. This wasn't going to be a quick fix or a simple matter of apologizing and moving forward. This was going to require sustained effort and genuine commitment to personal growth from both of us. Emma, I want you to know that regardless of what happens between us, this vacation has changed me. Not just because I learned about your wealth, but because I finally understood how badly I've been failing as a husband. Whether we stay married or not, I'm going to be a better person because of what you've taught me. What have I taught you? That strength doesn't always look like what you expect it to. That some of the most powerful people are the ones who don't need to prove their power. That treating someone with kindness and respect should be automatic, regardless of what they can do for you in return. I felt tears stinging my eyes, not from sadness, but from something that might have been hope. For the first time in years, Ryan was seeing me clearly, and what he saw seemed to genuinely inspire him to become a better version of himself. I love you, he said quietly. I know I haven't shown it well, but I do love you, and I'm going to prove it to you, whether it takes 6 months or 6 years. I love you too, I replied. That's never been the question. The question has been whether love is enough to sustain a marriage when it's not accompanied by respect and partnership, and genuine interest in each other's lives. We walked back to the resort together, both of us understanding that we'd reached a turning point in our relationship. It wasn't a happy ending exactly, but it wasn't an ending at all. It was a beginning, an opportunity to rebuild our marriage on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect, rather than assumptions and unexamined expectations. When we reached the main resort area, I could see Ryan's family gathered near the lobby with their luggage, preparing for their departure. They looked different than they had when we'd arrived a week ago. Less arrogant, more thoughtful, more aware of their own limitations and blind spots. The experiences they'd had over the past few days had clearly affected them in ways that went beyond simple gratitude for luxury accommodations. Margaret saw us approaching and walked over with a hesitant smile. Emma, I hope it's okay that we're saying goodbye. Our flight leaves in a few hours. Of course. I hope you've enjoyed your stay. It's been extraordinary. Life-changing, actually. She paused, seeming to gather her courage. I was wondering if you might be willing to have lunch with me sometime after we get home. Just the two of us. I'd like to continue the conversation we started last night. The invitation surprised me, but it also felt like a genuine gesture toward building a better relationship. Margaret had never asked to spend one-on-one time with me before, and the fact that she was making the effort suggested that her change of heart might be more substantial than I'd initially believed. I'd like that, I said, and I meant it. David and Jessica approached us next, both looking uncomfortable but determined to say something before they left. I could see that they'd been preparing for this conversation, probably discussing among themselves what they wanted to express. Emma, David began, I owe you an apology that goes far beyond this vacation. I've been dismissive and disrespectful to you for years, and there's no excuse for that behavior. I appreciate you saying that. I also want you to know that I admire what you've accomplished with your business. Building on your grandmother's legacy while making it your own takes real vision and skill. I'd like to learn more about your work if you're willing to share it. Aoi. This was particularly meaningful coming from David, because he'd always been so focused on traditional markers of success and achievement. For him to acknowledge my accomplishments and express genuine interest in learning more suggested a significant shift in his perspective. Jessica stepped forward then, her usual confidence replaced by genuine humility. Emma, I've been thinking about all the times I excluded you from family conversations and activities, and I feel sick about it. I made assumptions about your interests and capabilities based on nothing more than the fact that you're quieter than the rest of us. I'd like to change that if you'll let me, she continued. I'd like to get to know you properly, to understand what you're passionate about and what challenges you face. I'd like to be the sister-in-law you deserve instead of the one you've been stuck with. These conversations continued for another 30 minutes, with each family member taking time to acknowledge their past behavior and express genuine remorse for how they'd treated me. It wasn't a magical transformation that erased years of hurt, but it felt like the beginning of something healthier and more honest. Michael, who had been quieter throughout the vacation than the rest of Ryan's family, approached me as they were finishing their goodbyes. Emma, I wanted to thank you, personally, for the incredible experiences you arranged for us. But more than that, I wanted to apologize for my own role in excluding you from family activities. I should have spoken up when I saw you being left out of plans. His acknowledgement meant something to me because it recognized that being a passive bystander to unfair treatment was itself a form of participation in that treatment. It took courage to admit to his own failure to act when he could have made a difference. When their transportation arrived to take them to the airport, Margaret hugged me goodbye with real warmth. Thank you for the most incredible vacation of our lives, she said. But more than that, thank you for showing us how to be better people. Thank you for being willing to examine your own behavior and commit to changing it, I replied. That takes real courage. After they left, Ryan and I spent the rest of the day walking through the resort, talking about our memories from the past week and our hopes for the future. I showed him areas of the property that guests rarely saw, explaining the business decisions behind various amenities and services. He asked thoughtful questions and listened with genuine interest, making me feel like he was finally seeing me as a complete person rather than just his wife. We visited the employee break room, where I introduced Ryan to some of the staff members who'd been with the resort since my grandmother's time. He listened to their stories about Elena's leadership style and her commitment to creating a positive work environment, beginning to understand the kind of legacy I'd inherited and the responsibility I felt to honor it. Your grandmother sounds like an incredible woman, Ryan said as we walked through the resort's gardens in the late afternoon. I wish I'd had the chance to meet her. She would have liked you, I said, then paused to consider whether that was actually true. Though she probably would have given you some stern advice about how to treat your wife better. I would have deserved it. That evening, Carlos joined us for dinner to debrief from the week and discuss some business matters I needed to address. Ryan listened to our conversation about occupancy rates, staff development programs, and upcoming renovations with fascination rather than boredom. I had no idea hospitality management was so complex, he said to Carlos. Emma makes it look effortless, but there are so many moving pieces. Mrs. Santos has a gift for anticipating problems before they occur and creating solutions that benefit both guests and employees, Carlos replied. It's a rare combination of business acumen and genuine care for people's well-being. I saw Ryan looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen in years, something like pride mixed with genuine appreciation for who I was as a person. It was the kind of look that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with him in the first place, when he'd been curious about my thoughts and dreams instead of taking them for granted. Later that night, as we sat on our villa's terrace for what might be the last time as a married couple living together, Ryan brought up the practical aspects of our separation. How do you want to handle the living situation? I could move back in with my parents temporarily, or find an apartment somewhere. Actually, I've been thinking about that. I'd like to spend some time at Casa Serena, focusing on expanding the Panama operations. It would give us both space to work on ourselves while maintaining contact through regular visits and phone calls. How long would you be gone? A few months initially. Long enough for us both to get some perspective and start the hard work of changing our patterns. And then? And then we'll see. Maybe we'll discover that we can build something better together. Maybe we'll realize that we want different things from life. Either way, we'll be making decisions based on who we really are rather than who we've been pretending to be. Ryan nodded, understanding the wisdom in creating space for growth and reflection. The idea of living separately was scary for both of us, but it also felt necessary for any real change to occur. Emma, whatever happens, I want you to know that this week has been a gift. Not because of the luxury experiences or the expensive activities, but because it forced me to see myself clearly for the first time in years. I don't like what I saw, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to change it. I reached over and took his hand, feeling a connection to him that I hadn't experienced since the early days of our relationship. I feel the same way. This vacation showed me that I've been settling for less than I deserve, not just from you, but from all the relationships in my life. I've been so focused on being accommodating and keeping the peace that I lost sight of my own worth and my own needs. So we're both going to do better. We're both going to try to do better. That's all any of us can do. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear in the tropical sky above us. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and difficult conversations, but tonight we were just two people who'd loved each other imperfectly, trying to figure out how to love better. As we prepared for bed that night, I found myself thinking about the transformation that had occurred over the course of this vacation. A week ago, I'd been the quiet, overlooked wife who tolerated being excluded from family activities because confronting the situation seemed too difficult. Tonight, I was someone who'd demanded respect and recognition, who'd used my position and resources to force people to confront their own behavior, who'd refused to accept treatment that diminished my worth as a person. The change hadn't happened overnight, of course. It had been building for years as I'd grown more confident in my business role and more aware of my own value independent of other people's opinions. But this vacation had crystallized something for me, had forced me to choose between the comfort of familiar patterns and the uncertainty of demanding more from the people in my life. Emma, Ryan said as we turned off the lights, I want you to know that I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself this week. I should have been the one defending you all these years, but I'm glad you found the strength to defend yourself. Thank you. That means a lot to me. I also want you to know that I understand why you need space from our marriage right now. I haven't given you much reason to believe that I can change, and I need to prove it through my actions rather than just my words. I turned to face him in the darkness of our bedroom. Ryan, I want our marriage to work. I want to believe that we can build something better together. But I need to see evidence that you're committed to growth and change, not just saying what you think I want to hear. I understand, and I'm going to prove it to you, starting tomorrow. The next morning arrived gray and overcast, with heavy clouds suggesting that rain might be coming later in the day. The change in weather seemed appropriate somehow, marking the end of our time at Sunset Bay Resort and the beginning of whatever came next for both of us. We packed our belongings slowly, both of us reluctant to leave this place where so much had been revealed and resolved. Ryan kept asking questions about the resort's operations, about my plans for future expansion, about the challenges I faced in managing properties across multiple countries. His interest seemed genuine rather than obligatory, and I found myself opening up about aspects of my work that I'd never shared with him before. Carlos met us at the front desk to handle our checkout, though of course there were no actual charges for my family's stay. He presented me with a detailed summary of all the services and experiences we'd provided during the week, along with their total value. $137,000, he said quietly, showing me the itemized breakdown. That includes all the premium upgrades, the yacht charter, the helicopter tours, the private dining experiences, and the various amenities your family enjoyed. Ryan's eyes widened when he heard the total. Emma, you spent more than my annual salary on a single week's vacation for my family. I invested in giving them experiences that would help them understand the full scope of what's possible when people treat each other with respect and appreciation, I corrected. Whether that investment pays off in terms of improved relationships remains to be seen. As our helicopter prepared for departure, I took one last walk around the resort grounds. I visited the employee areas, thanking the staff for their exceptional service during our stay and discussing some upcoming projects that would affect their work schedules. I checked in with the head of housekeeping about some minor maintenance issues I'd noticed during my inspection, and I spoke with the activities coordinator about guest feedback from recent excursions. These conversations reminded me once again why I loved this work. Every decision I made had real consequences for real people, both the guests who came here seeking memorable experiences and the employees who depended on the resort's success for their livelihoods. My grandmother had taught me that leadership meant taking responsibility for creating environments where people could thrive, and I took that responsibility seriously. When it was time to leave, Ryan and I stood together on the helicopter landing pad, looking back at the resort that had been the site of so much revelation and transformation. The property looked peaceful and beautiful in the morning light, ready to welcome new guests who would create their own memories within its walls. It's strange to think that a week ago I knew almost nothing about this place or your connection to it, Ryan said. Now I can't imagine not knowing about this part of your life. That's exactly the problem we need to solve, I replied. How did we live together for 3 years without you knowing such a fundamental aspect of who I am and what I do? Because I was lazy and self-centered, and assumed that if something was important, you'd force me to pay attention to it. I never considered that maybe you were waiting for me to show interest on my own. The helicopter ride back to the mainland gave us time to discuss the practical details of our upcoming separation. Ryan would stay in our shared home while I relocated to Panama for an extended stay at Casa Serena. We would maintain regular contact through video calls and text messages, and he would visit me in Panama after he'd had some time to begin his own work on personal growth and change. I'm going to start therapy immediately, he told me as we flew over the stunning Costa Rican landscape. Individual therapy to work on understanding why I've been such a passive partner, and then couples counseling when you're ready for that step. That sounds like a good plan. I'll be doing my own work on understanding what I need from a relationship and how to communicate those needs more effectively. Emma, can I ask you something? Ryan said, his voice thoughtful as he watched the coastline pass beneath us. How long have you been unhappy in our marriage? Was this vacation the breaking point, or have you been feeling this way for a while? I considered his question carefully, wanting to give him an honest answer that would help him understand the progression of my feelings over the years. I think I started feeling invisible in our relationship about a year after we got married. It was subtle at first, just small moments where I felt like you weren't really listening when I talked about my work or my concerns. But over time, those moments accumulated into a pattern. Can you give me an example? Do you remember when I was dealing with the major renovation project at the Panama property 2 years ago? I was stressed about coordinating contractors across different countries, managing budget overruns, and dealing with permit issues that were threatening to delay our reopening. Ryan frowned, clearly trying to recall the situation. I remember you being busy with work stuff, but I don't remember the specific details. That's exactly the problem. You remember that I was busy, but you never asked what was causing the stress or whether there was anything you could do to support me. When I tried to talk to you about the challenges I was facing, you would listen for a few minutes and then change the subject to something about your own work or your family. I could see the recognition dawning in Ryan's expression as he began to understand the pattern I was describing. I started to feel like I was living with a roommate rather than a partner, I continued. Someone who was pleasant and considerate about practical things like household responsibilities, but who wasn't genuinely interested in my inner life or my professional challenges. And my family made it worse. Your family reflected the same dynamic I was experiencing with you. They saw me as an accessory to your life rather than as a person with my own identity and accomplishments. When you didn't defend me or insist that I be included in family activities, it reinforced the message that my presence wasn't particularly valued. Ryan was quiet for several minutes, processing what I'd told him. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with regret. I failed. You in so many ways. I can see that now, but I'm horrified that I was so blind to it at the time. The important thing is that you can see it now and that you're committed to changing. That gives me hope that we might be able to build something better together. When we landed at the small airport where our cars were waiting, we stood together in the parking lot, preparing to go our separate ways for the first time in our 3-year marriage. The moment felt significant and scary, like we were stepping off a cliff into an unknown future. How often should we talk while you're in Panama? Ryan asked. I don't want to overwhelm you with contact, but I also don't want you to feel like I'm not thinking about you or working on our relationship. Why don't we start with a phone call every few days and see how that feels? If either of us needs more or less contact, we can adjust. That sounds reasonable. And Emma, I want you to know that I'm going to use this time apart to become the man you deserve. Whether that's enough to save our marriage remains to be seen, but I owe it to both of us to try. I hugged him goodbye, feeling a complex mixture of sadness and hope. The man I was saying goodbye to wasn't the same person I'd married 3 years ago, just as I wasn't the same woman who'd said yes to his proposal. We'd both grown and changed, but not necessarily in ways that had brought us closer together. Now we had a chance to grow deliberately and intentionally, with the goal of building a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine interest in each other's lives. The flight to Panama gave me time to reflect on everything that had happened during our week at Sunset Bay Resort. In 7 days, I'd gone from being the overlooked family member who quietly accepted exclusion to being someone who demanded respect and recognition. I'd revealed a part of my identity that I'd kept hidden for years, not out of shame, but out of a desire to be loved for who I was rather than what I owned. The revelation had forced everyone in Ryan's family to confront their own assumptions and behavior, leading to what appeared to be genuine remorse and commitment to change. Whether those changes would prove lasting remained to be seen, but the conversations I'd had with Margaret, David, and Jessica had felt substantive and sincere. Most importantly, the experience had clarified for me what I needed from a marriage and what I was no longer willing to accept. I deserved a partner who was genuinely curious about my work and my goals, who defended me when others treated me poorly, who saw me as an equal contributor to our relationship rather than as someone who should adapt to his family's preferences and expectations. When I arrived at Casa Serena, the staff greeted me with their usual warmth and professionalism. The property looked beautiful in the late afternoon light, with its terraced gardens cascading down the hillside toward the Pacific Ocean. This place had always felt like home to me, in a way that even my shared residence with Ryan hadn't. Perhaps because here I was fully myself without any need to minimize or hide aspects of my identity. Maria, the head of housekeeping, helped me settle into the owner's suite and brought me up to date on recent developments at the property. We've had several guests ask about extending their stays, she reported. The new spa treatments you approved have been incredibly popular, and the yoga retreat programs are booked solid through the end of the year. That's wonderful news. Have we had any staffing challenges with the increased demand? Nothing we can't handle, but we might want to consider hiring additional massage therapists if the spa bookings continue at this level. I spent the evening reviewing financial reports and planning documents, immersing myself in the work that had always given my life structure and purpose. It felt good to focus on concrete problems with clear solutions, to be in an environment where my expertise was respected and my decisions were implemented efficiently. Over the next few weeks, I settled into a routine at Casa Serena that balanced my business responsibilities with the personal work I needed to do to understand what I wanted from my marriage and my life. I started working with a therapist via video sessions exploring the patterns in my relationships and the ways I'd learned to minimize my own needs in order to keep peace with others. It sounds like you've spent years trying to be the perfect wife and daughter-in-law, my therapist observed during one of our sessions. But perfect for whom? And at what cost to your own sense of self? I thought if I could just be accommodating, enough, understanding enough, undemanding enough, then people would appreciate me for who I was rather than what I could provide for them. And what did you learn from that approach? That being accommodating doesn't necessarily lead to being appreciated. People often take kindness and flexibility for granted, especially when it's not reciprocated. These conversations helped me understand that my decision to keep my wealth private hadn't just been about wanting to be loved for myself. It had also been a way of avoiding the discomfort of setting boundaries and demanding better treatment from the people in my life. By not revealing the full extent of my resources and accomplishments, I'd been able to tell myself that any poor treatment I received was based on ignorance rather than character flaws in the people I cared about. Meanwhile, Ryan and I maintained our agreed-upon phone schedule, talking every few days about our respective work on personal growth and change. He'd started individual therapy and was being remarkably open about what he was learning about himself in the process. My therapist asked me to think about why I've always chosen the path of least resistance in our marriage, he told me during one of our calls. I realized that I've been afraid of conflict my entire life, ever since I was a kid watching my parents fight constantly before their divorce. So you learn to keep the peace at any cost. Exactly. Even when keeping the peace meant allowing people I loved to be treated poorly. I thought I was being diplomatic, but really, I was being cowardly. What are you learning about how to change that pattern? That I need to get comfortable with the idea that standing up for what's right sometimes means making other people uncomfortable. That my job as a husband isn't to make sure everyone gets along, but to make sure my wife feels supported and valued. These conversations gave me hope that Ryan was doing genuine work on himself, rather than just going through the motions of therapy to appease me. He was asking thoughtful questions about my work and my goals, showing interest in the details of running Casa Serena and the challenges I faced in managing properties across multiple countries. I've been reading about sustainable tourism practices, he told me during one call. I never realized how complex it is to balance environmental protection with economic development in tourist destinations. It's one of the biggest challenges we face. We want to provide jobs and economic opportunities for local communities, but we also have a responsibility to protect the natural resources that make these places special in the first place. How do you make those decisions? How do you balance competing priorities? For the first time in our relationship, Ryan was asking me questions that went beyond surface-level politeness. He wanted to understand not just what I did, but how I thought about complex problems and made difficult decisions. It felt like talking to someone who was genuinely curious about my mind and my perspective rather than just waiting for his turn to speak. After 6 weeks in Panama, I received an unexpected phone call from Margaret. She was calling to follow up on her invitation to have lunch together, but also to share something that had happened since their return from Costa Rica. Emma, I hope this doesn't sound presumptuous, but I've been thinking constantly about our conversation at the resort. I realized that my treatment of you wasn't just about family dynamics. It was part of a larger pattern in how I relate to people who are different from me. What do you mean? I've been examining my behavior toward other people in my life, and I've realized that I've consistently dismissed or excluded people who didn't fit my narrow definition of interesting or valuable. My neighbor who's a single mother working 2 jobs, my hairdresser who's an artist in her spare time, my book club member who teaches elementary school. I've been polite to these people, but I've never really seen them as having lives and experiences that might enrich my own understanding of the world. This admission surprised me because it suggested that Margaret's self-reflection had gone far beyond just her treatment of me. She was examining fundamental aspects of her character and worldview. I've started volunteering at a local literacy program, she continued. Working with adults who are learning to read for the first time. It's humbling and inspiring, and it's teaching me to appreciate people for their courage and determination, rather than their social status or educational background. That sounds like meaningful work. It is. And Emma, I want you to know that this change in my perspective isn't dependent on whether you and Ryan stay married. Even if you decide to divorce him, I hope you'll give me a chance to be the person I should have been from the beginning. After ending the call with Margaret, I found myself feeling cautiously optimistic about the possibility of building better relationships with Ryan's family. Change was possible, but it required sustained effort and genuine commitment to growth, rather than just good intentions. Around the same time, I received similar calls from David and Jessica, both of whom wanted to share their own journeys of self-reflection and change. David had started reading books about emotional intelligence and communication, while Jessica had begun asking more questions about other people's lives and interests instead of dominating conversations with stories about herself. I never realized how much I talked about myself until I started paying attention to my conversation patterns, Jessica admitted during our call. I would ask people questions just to be polite, but then I'd barely listen to their answers because I was already thinking about what I wanted to say next. What are you doing differently now? I'm practicing active listening, really focusing on what people are telling me and asking follow-up questions that show I'm engaged with their experiences. It's amazing how much more interesting conversations become when you're genuinely curious about other people's perspectives. These reports of change were encouraging, but I was also aware that people often experience initial enthusiasm for self-improvement that fades over time as old patterns reassert themselves. The real test would be whether these new behaviors became permanent fixtures of their personalities or just temporary responses to the crisis that our vacation revelation had created. 3 months into my stay in Panama, Ryan asked if he could visit for a long weekend. We'd been talking regularly, and I could hear the changes in how he approached our conversations, but I wanted to see whether those changes translated into different behavior when we were together in person. I've been working on something I'd like to show you, he said. It's not a grand gesture or an attempt to fix everything at once. It's just something that represents how I'm trying to approach our relationship differently. I was curious about what he'd been working on, but also nervous about seeing him, again after months of separation. Our phone conversations had been positive, but physical presence added layers of complexity that were difficult to navigate through electronic communication. When Ryan arrived at Casa Serena, I could see immediately that something fundamental had shifted in his demeanor. He moved with more confidence and purpose, and he looked at me with the kind of focused attention that I remembered from the early days of our relationship. He greeted the staff by name, having apparently memorized the information I'd shared about them during our phone calls. "Mrs. Santos," he said to Maria with a warm smile. "Emma has told me so much about your work here, and how much she values your leadership of the housekeeping team." Maria beamed at the recognition, and I could see that Ryan's acknowledgement of her importance to the resort's operations meant something to her. This was exactly the kind of behavior change I'd been hoping to see, evidence that he was learning to pay attention to the people and relationships that mattered to me. That evening, Ryan presented me with the project he'd been working on during our separation. It was a comprehensive business plan for a consulting company that would help other hospitality properties implement sustainable tourism practices and ethical labor policies. "I've been researching the industry since our conversation about balancing environmental protection with economic development," he explained. "I realized that there are probably a lot of property owners who want to operate more responsibly, but don't know how to implement changes without hurting their profitability." I read through his proposal with growing amazement. It was thorough, thoughtful, and demonstrated a deep understanding of the challenges facing the hospitality industry. More importantly, it showed that he'd been listening carefully to my concerns and had found a way to contribute meaningfully to the work that was important to me. This is impressive, Ryan. You've clearly put a lot of time and research into this. I wanted to find a way to be your partner in business as well as in life, if you'll have me. I know I can't undo years of not paying attention to your work, but I can commit to being genuinely engaged going forward. We spent the weekend walking through Casa Serena together, with Ryan asking detailed questions about operations and offering thoughtful observations about guest services and staff management. He wasn't trying to take over or prove his importance, but rather to understand my world and find ways to support my goals. I can see why you love this work, he said as we sat on the terrace of the owner's suite, watching the sunset over the Pacific. You're not just running a business. You're creating experiences that bring joy to people's lives while providing good jobs for hundreds of employees. That's incredibly meaningful work. It's what my grandmother taught me hospitality should be about. Not just luxury for its own sake, but luxury that comes from genuine care and attention to detail. I want to be part of that mission, if you'll let me. Not as someone who takes over or changes what you've built, but as someone who supports and amplifies your vision. By the end of the weekend, I felt more hopeful about our marriage than I had in years. Ryan's behavior changes seemed genuine and sustainable, rooted in real understanding of what he'd been doing wrong and genuine commitment to doing better. He was asking the right questions, showing interest in the right things, and treating me like a partner rather than just a wife. I think I'm ready to start couples counseling, I told him as he prepared to leave Panama. I want to see if we can build something better together. I'd like that too. Emma, I know I have a lot more work to do to prove that these changes are permanent. But I want you to know that regardless of what happens with our marriage, this process has made me a better person. You deserve credit for forcing me to confront my own shortcomings. Over the following months, Ryan and I began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship through weekly couples counseling sessions and regular visits to each other's locations. The work was difficult and sometimes painful, requiring both of us to examine patterns of behavior that had become deeply ingrained over years of marriage. But gradually, we began to rediscover what we'd loved about each other in the first place, while building new foundations of respect and partnership. Ryan became genuinely interested in my business operations, eventually moving to Panama part-time to help implement his sustainable tourism consulting company in partnership with my resort properties. His family continued their own work on personal growth, with Margaret becoming one of my closest confidants, and David and Jessica learning to include me in family activities in ways that felt natural rather than obligatory. The transformation wasn't instant or easy, but it was real and lasting. Looking back on that week at Sunset Bay Resort, I realized that it had been a turning point not just for my marriage, but for my understanding of my own worth and my willingness to demand respect from the people in my life. I'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to refuse to accept their poor treatment, forcing them to confront their own behavior and choose whether to grow or remain stuck in destructive patterns. The resort itself had become more than just a business to me. It was a symbol of the legacy my grandmother had left me and the responsibility I had to honor her values while building my own vision for the future. It was a place where I'd learned to stand up for myself and demand the respect I deserved, not just as a business owner, but as a human being worthy of kindness and consideration. Most importantly, it had taught me that true partnership in marriage meant more than just loving someone. It meant being genuinely curious about their inner life, defending them when others treated them poorly, and working together to build something larger than either person could achieve alone. It meant seeing each other clearly and choosing to grow together rather than taking each other for granted. As I stood on the terrace of Casa Serena one evening, 6 months after that transformative vacation, I felt a sense of peace and purpose that I hadn't experienced in years. My marriage was stronger than it had ever been, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine partnership. My relationships with Ryan's family had evolved into something authentic and supportive, and my business was thriving under my confident leadership and Ryan's complementary expertise. I thought about my grandmother Elena and the lessons she'd taught me about strength, resilience, and the importance of creating environments where people could flourish. She would have been proud of the woman I'd become and the choices I'd made to honor both her legacy and my own values. The sun was setting over the Pacific Ocean, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight, I was exactly where I belonged, surrounded by beauty and purpose, confident in my own worth, and excited about the future I was building with people who truly valued my presence in their lives. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.